Oh. Good morning, everyone. All right, we can do a little better than that. Good morning, everyone. All right, there we go. Make me believe it, folks. Good morning. It's my pleasure. It's a real honor to open up this plenary session with the theme, Powering Growth and Influence. It's an amazing week. Thinking about it on the way over, how we come together and we think about what was and what will be. And integral to all of that is CHCI. For 38 years since its inception, CHCI has worked tirelessly to develop the new cadre of leaders. I myself, having been a fellow, I know, looking back, that in the grand mosaic of my life, one of the building bricks, one of the pieces, one of the fundamentals was being a CHCI fellow. So for folks that are here for the first time, enjoy the amazing sessions, enjoy the amazing parties, but also I think we should take a moment to reflect on all that CHCI means to us and how it feeds the collective good as we think about our collective destiny as the Latino people move forward in the 21st century, as we think about this seismic time that we're living in. Not what is, but what will be. And that's what this session is all about. For myself, as I mentioned, being a fellow and thinking about all of the amazing opportunities, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my fellowship. I wouldn't be having the ability to work for an amazing company that helps fund, that helps bring change through its quiet giving to organizations like CHCI, to empower students at all levels, and then to see the fruits of that labor, to see folks, to see my colleagues at the highest levels of government working in Congress, impacting education, impacting healthcare, impacting telecommunications. Again, the theme of CHCI is educating, empowering, connect our young adults. They've done that mission for 38 years to support a strong America. And it has transformed the lives of 1,700 young Latinos. We have to continue to maintain our commitment, our fidelity to that mission, to see it expanded even further. CHCI can only do this growth with your help, the contributions of the individuals and organizations to make this work possible. And as we think about the many important companies like mine that work to close the digital divide, to help fund the programs, Ready to Leave, et cetera, I can keep going. But the work they do is just, it is so very important because CHCI could not exist without it. So I think we should all give a big round of applause to these companies who every year come to the table to make sure that CHCI can actually complete its mission to educate, applaud. So everyone, please, a big round of applause for these companies. And I'm proud to say that I do work for a corporation that is always been at the table, continues to be at the table, that shares its mission. You know of us from whether it's the Minions or the theme parks or the World Cup or what have you. But the thing that makes me most singularly proud is that I work for a company that always commits to CHCI and empowering young folks. Closing the digital divide, yes. Working to fund these organizations that work for immigration reform, that work to bring change in Washington, D.C., yes. These other, my brethren corporations do the same, and they should be applauded for it. So, with that, we'd like to recognize, we're recognizing our Heritage Month signature sponsors who have made this program possible for all of these events. And now I'd like to have a special thanks to Sherm and McDonald's for making this session possible. Without their support, it wouldn't be happening, so please give them a round of applause. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Akin, Sherm. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs. Mike?
Thank you, Juan, and thank you for your inspiring words and your continued leadership to the Hispanic community. It's a privilege for Sherm to partner with the Institute to be a part of these important discussions and education program. We've been a proud sponsor of the CHCI program since 2009, and we look forward to our continuing work with CHCI. As the world's largest organization devoted to human resource management, Sherm is here because we share common goals with you. Your theme for this session, Powering Growth and Influence, is an accurate portrayal of CHCI and Sherm's work to develop the next generation of Latino leaders. The theme has also caused us to reflect on the progress we've already made together. For example, today Latinos have a strength in numbers. There are nearly 60 million Latinos in the United States. That's 18% of the U.S. population. Have rapidly growing political influence. The Hispanic vote now counts for 9% of all U.S. voters. Are an economic powerhouse. Purchasing power for the Hispanic community exceeded $1.3 trillion in 2014 and will grow another $500 billion in 3 years. And last but certainly not least, the Hispanic community are job creators. Through 4 million plus Hispanic-owned businesses in the U.S., a 57% increase since 2007. There is no question that you are the growing influence and partner and power in the United States. And that progress has momentum to address lingering challenges, such as improving education and job opportunities for Latino youth who are posed to make up to 30% of the U.S. workforce by 2050. Sherm and the HR profession are doing their part to address these issues. For example, Sherm and CHCI are working on a report to identify and reduce barriers in the workplace that many Latinos currently face. We are promoting work-based training for youth through programs like the new Global Apprenticeship Network because internships, apprenticeships, and other job-related opportunities improve the odds of young people gaining employment. In fact, Sherm and CHCI are fielding applications for the first ever internship program that connects Hispanic youth and the HR profession. In conclusion, we look forward to continuing to work with CHCI to develop the next generation of Latino leaders and HR professionals. Know that the Society for Human Resource Management remains a committed partner in helping CHCI power the growth of all backgrounds, of all individuals, to provide them the opportunity to achieve their full potential. Now, please help me to introduce the rock star of CHCI, CHCI's CEO and President, Esther Aguilera.
Thank you, Mike. And good morning, buenos dias. I hope you guys have downloaded the CHCI app. It is really terrific. And you can follow all the sessions and even view some of the sessions on your mobile phone. We also have people joining us online for this session, so I want to thank their participation. And our conference host is Coca-Cola. I really want to thank Coca-Cola for being there from the very beginning when CHCI was formed to today being our top supporter and lead sponsor of this very, very powerful conference. Can we give a big round of applause and thank Coca-Cola? To Mike and Sherm, the Society for Human Resource Management, we're very excited about what we're going to do together to open more doors for youth and expose them to the human resources profession and being leaders in that profession. I'm so proud of what we have planned this morning and all of the offerings CHCI has put together to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. This very powerful public policy conference is a great forum for individuals from all parts of our nation different sectors of industry, government, as well as students, current and emerging leaders, to work together and talk about major policy issues affecting the Latino community and the nation. We have in our audience today our leaders. They're leaders today, and with the CHCI program, we're very excited about their future. Please welcome the class of fall interns and fellows that are with us. If you can stand up and be recognized. Powering growth and influence is our potential, and it's up to us to realize that potential. So it's an exciting time for the community, and this morning's session is going to explore how Latino growth and increased Latino engagement will affect the nation's economy, workforce, and the upcoming elections. Now please, we'll be welcoming our amazing speakers, and I'd like to start with introducing the Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of New Mexico and Director of Research at Latino Decisions. To get us started, let's welcome Dr. Gabriel Sanchez.
Buenos dias. How are you all doing today? Well, it's an absolute pleasure to get things started today, to get kind of an overview of Latino growth and engagement, essentially connecting the demographic numbers with what we'll see electorally and the Latino influence moving forward. It's always a dangerous proposition to give a professor a slide deck and a time limit. So I'm going to jump right into it so we can cover as much ground as possible. So the first slide gives you kind of the big picture overview of how things will look in the United States projected out into the future. So this slide hopefully gives you an idea of how Latino population growth long-term is really fueling the demographic changes that we're seeing in the United States overall. So if you see the green line that's projected on a decreasing plane, that's essentially the non-Hispanic white population that's decreasing in overall size and sheer numbers. And the red line is the Latino population that's surging. So you see out towards 2050, those two lines begin to converge. Many of you come from states where this is already the reality demographically. So that's the big picture, you know, if you will, that'll set the stage for a lot of the other pieces of the puzzle that we'll walk through this morning. So what I want to do is kind of dive a little bit deeper into that number demographic change and kind of see what's fueling that within the Latino population. Age is, as I'll note, a double-edged sword for the Latino electorate. On one hand, if you see the median age projected here, this indicates that half the Latino population in the United States is under the age of 28, the other half over the age of 28. As you see, by far the youngest population, racially and ethnically speaking, in the United States today. So that's fueling that long-term population shift that you saw on the first slide, and that's what indicates that the Latino vote will double in 20 years, literally double in 20 years. The flip side to that, however, is that because 18 to 29-year-olds in the United States are the population least likely to vote for all racial and ethnic groups, that means we have a large concentration of folks, young people, that we're going to have to mobilize and engage to ensure that our potential is actualized. Give you some snapshot of this. I'm sure this isn't the last time that you'll hear this number, but every 30 seconds in the United States today, a Latino citizen turns the age of 18 and becomes eligible to vote. That equates to about 66,000 people a month that become eligible to vote that are Latino. It's a powerful number. That means, in essence, that by the time I'm finished with my talk with you this morning, we'll have 20 brand new eligible voters across the United States that are Latino. Pretty powerful stuff. What do things look like in terms of our overall voting numbers? As you see, from 1996 all the way projected to 2016, we've seen a steady increase in the number of Latinos who have actually showed up and cast a ballot in presidential races. What that equates to is for 2012 to 2016, we see an increase of about 2 million folks. We're actually projected to break 13 million Latino voters in 2016. That's awesome. That's an amazing number I think we should all be proud of, especially as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. But as we celebrate and we reflect on the power that we already have as an electorate in the United States, one of the things I want to touch on is what the potential of the Latino vote would look like if we saw more of our people registered to vote and actually show up at the ballot box. What does this look like? Well, I'll run through a series of maps to give you an idea of how things look nationally as well as state by state. But the big picture number here is that if we look at 2014, we saw that there were over 12 million Latinos across the United States that were eligible to vote but were not registered. That's a huge population of potential voters that we need to engage. All of us should engage this population to show our overall electoral strength moving into the future. Obviously, in the United States, overall numbers alone don't do the trick. We have an electoral college, so we have to break these numbers down state by state to see what the projected growth could look like. In California alone, there's 3.5 million eligible Latinos who are not registered, right? Think about the sheer magnitude of that number, 3.5 million individuals who are otherwise eligible to vote. We just need to get those folks registered. And the key backdrop, long-standing political science literature has suggested that once folks become registered to vote, their likelihood of actually voting increases exponentially. So our work is cut out for us. We have to get those folks registered, but we know once we get to that point, we'll see the huge growth in terms of our overall population strength reflected in our voting numbers. Take a look at the number of those that are eligible but not registered in the state of California relative to those that are actually registered. You see, in essence, there's just as many Latinos in the great state of California that are actually voting as there are that are eligible but not quite at that tipping point. That you'll see reflected state by state. That's the big picture for this notion of capitalizing on our electoral strength. I show you Texas's numbers as well. Here you see about 2.6 million Latinos who are eligible to vote but not registered. I start with California and Texas largely because, if you're not aware, those two states comprise about 50% of the overall Latino population in the United States reside just in those two states. So when you look at the number of registered Latinos relative to those that are eligible but not registered in Texas, that gives you some magnitude, not only in terms of the electoral map federally, but when we think about the policy changes that could be enacted and the local level officials that could be elected if we galvanize the Latino vote in those two states alone. How do things look in other places around the country? Similar story, state of Florida, almost 1 million Latinos who are eligible to vote but not quite registered. You see that reflected in terms of the overall registration numbers. Again, same story. We need to get those folks out. We need to get them registered. This is not a regional phenomenon. We see in New York, for example, approaching 800,000 Latinos who are eligible to vote but not quite registered. Very similar in terms of what that 50-50 breakdown looks like in terms of those that are actually registered. When we move out west, particularly in a state like Arizona that has a lot of local level policy enactment, particularly in the realm of immigration, we see almost 500,000 Latinos who are eligible to vote but not registered. Think about how things might change in that state if we mobilize that population, what policy changes we'd see, particularly in the realm of immigration in that state. Colorado is an interesting one. If folks aren't aware, Colorado has moved into key battleground state status driven exclusively by Latino population growth in that state. That has made the state viable for both parties. That has really galvanized the Latino population in terms of the Rocky Mountain West and their overall electoral influence. But we still have over 200,000 Latinos in the state of Colorado who are, again, otherwise eligible to vote but not quite registered. Right? You see that reflected almost as much as the overall population that's registered and voting. Tons of potential out there, low-hanging fruit, if you will. So maybe the most powerful image that I'll leave you with is what would happen if we saw all of those Latinos who are not registered actually registered, and we saw the Latino population vote at the same numbers that non-Latinos do. This is the electoral map from the 2012 election. You can get this from Latino Decisions' website. Pull down the app, play with the numbers, look at how things might change if you saw differences. In essence, we're holding this map constant to what we actually saw in 2012, which Latinos comprised 10% of the overall electorate and 75% of Latinos voted for President Obama. At least that's the data that Latino Decisions showcased in our large national survey from that year. Analyze, if you will, take a mental picture of what the electoral map looks like. Again, this is exactly as you saw it play out in 2012. Now look at what happens if Latinos comprise 16% of the national vote. That's in essence what we would see if you saw all those folks that were registered actually turn out to vote at the same rates that non-Latinos do, and you saw that population of the non-registered Latinos, significant component, actually registering at numbers you see for non-Latinos. Take a look, if you will, at that slide. If you didn't catch it, what happens to the state of Texas? It flips, right? Game-changing moment could be driven by Latinos. That changes the whole entire calculus of how parties really look to galvanize their overall winning strategy. driven exclusively, again, by the potential of the Latino population. So if you ask me, Professor Sanchez, what's it going to take to make that happen? It's twofold. Obviously, mobilization is going to be a key factor there. It's going to mean more effort in terms of voter registration drives, get out the vote efforts, right? So that's a major piece to the puzzle. But I want to close with this notion that we also have to play defense on some significant policy changes that are happening across the American states that not as many people are paying attention to. I highlight the notion of photo ID laws. This is an area where myself and longtime co-author Professor Matt Barreto from UCLA have been engaged in for several years. We've co-authored several expert witness reports and cases at the state and federal level across the country, and I isolate the state of Texas because this is the most recent case that we worked on, and if you didn't catch it, this is a case where we actually won in federal court and they tossed out the photo ID law in the state of Texas. This data comes directly, thank you, pretty big victory for us. This data comes directly from the survey work that we did for that expert witness report. And if you see here, this is among all eligible voters in the state of Texas, you see that Latinos by far, statistically significant, are the population most likely to lack the required ID to be able to vote. And as a consequence, you see essentially 11.4% of all Latinos in the state of Texas, if this law was enacted, will become disenfranchised just like that with one public policy. That equates to essentially 550,000 Latinos who would otherwise be able to vote, that because they don't have the required ID, and in many cases lack the documents to acquire that ID, would be left out of this entire picture. So again, mobilization efforts, but also really ensuring that a lot of these policies that are restricting access to the ballot box aren't kept in play. So again, I'll give you kind of the context, hopefully warm things up for greater discussion. You can go to latinodecisions.com, grab free data, blog posts, presentations. You'll have more data to be able to analyze than you probably have time to analyze it. Thank you very much. I hope this was enlightening, and I believe we have 10 minutes of questions. I believe we have 2 different microphones on each side of the room, so if you have a question, raise your hand and the folks will find you and lead you to a microphone.
Start with the end. I am Chris Kirshner from United Teachers of Dade, but I'm very interested in what is the barrier to the photo IDs, particularly for other states like Florida that have photo ID laws. Is it that people are losing their IDs and it costs money to replace them? What are the reasons, or how can we help people get photo IDs in states that still have those laws?
Excellent question. So one thing that we want to clarify is you often hear, what's the big deal of getting a photo ID? Don't you have to have an ID to rent a movie at Blockbuster, for example, right? You hear that backdrop. Well, if you look at the fine-tuned print on a lot of these laws, it's not just a photo ID. It's really that the ID has a name that matches what's on the voter rolls. So Latinos in the room, if you get married and don't change your name officially, you're not eligible to vote according to that law. Your registration materials in terms of your address has to match. Latinos are a very mobile population, so you have to go and update what's on the voting records in order for that to match. So it's a lot of the fine-tuned details that in our work we really analyze closely. You're right that the biggest barrier is the fact that a lot of folks might have been issued a driver's license, but what happens if your wallet's stolen, right? You don't have that ID in your possession. The dangerous thing, and in our survey work we analyze this, we look at the physical distance from being able to acquire the ID at the office that provides that for you. And in many rural places like the state of Texas, the physical distance alone can be a significant barrier, particularly for Latinos that don't have access to a car to get there. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to pay attention to. It's not as simple as just showing up with an ID. There's a lot of other significant barriers embedded within these laws that we should be paying careful attention to.
Hi, hello. My name is Carlos Vera, and I have a question regarding actually getting Latinos to vote. Like you said, Texas, if it wanted to, it could be a blue state. Could you say that the Democratic Party is not investing the right funds, and it's more than just saying, hey, let's get out the vote? It actually takes money. And I think some Democratic strategists might think, oh, we don't really have to invest in Latinos come 2016 because they prefer us over Republicans. I said, that's right, but it's not about preference. It's what's going to get people out to vote. So.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a twofold answer to this. One is obviously with more resources you can have more impact. One of the things we need to pay attention to, however, is the amount of money that we've been spending to mobilize our people has increased over time at a pretty significant rate, but we're not seeing the actualization of that money spent. And part of that is we need to be better at our strategies. Take, for example, the 18 to 29-year-old age group. That population among Latinos, more than any other group in the United States, tends to be online and uses their smartphone to get information about politics just like anything else. Good news is it's not very expensive to utilize that technology to tap into that population, but our research has shown that that particular 18 to 29 age group is the most cynical about their vote actually mattering. So a lot of it is communicating with young people. This is why you need to be engaged in the political process, and this is why it matters. Being able to show them concrete examples to overcome that notion that, hey, why should I engage in this? My vote doesn't even matter. So I think it's being very strategic, looking state by state. Obviously, all of us Latinos are not created equal. What might work in New Mexico might not work in New York. So we have to have on-the-ground strategies, really from homegrown folks that know the people in their communities. I think that's really the message. Obviously, resources matter, but that's not all of it.
I have a question about the voter ID. I'm Elizabeth Taylor Martinez from United Teachers of Dade. If you have already assisted in overturning that law for voter ID in the state of Texas, and we have a landmark decision, can't that be applied in every state in America to overturn this? Because Hispanics are being disqualified from voting, but so are other Americans who are eligible to vote and can't simply because they don't have a number and an ID and a photo.
No, I think you're absolutely right. When we look at photo IDs, obviously our research is focused on the Latino population, but this is not about race. In many cases, it's social class, right? It's having the financial resources to get the underlying documents like your birth certificate that's required in many places to acquire the ID in the first place. You know, I wish it were as simple as winning one case kind of swings the tide of things. There's some momentum to maybe allow the Supreme Court to take another look at that law. But one of the things you have to keep in mind is that in each victory that we might run up, you know, the folks that are implementing these photo ID laws are extremely smart and strategic. They tweak their laws to hopefully address whatever happened in the case before them that got it tossed out to hopefully be able to be passed moving forward. You're exactly right. In many states, for example, we need to form coalitions with other folks that are being harmed by these laws. In some states, for example, in the Dakotas, we're seeing that some of those laws that they're trying to implement essentially allow every ID except for tribal ID to count towards being able to vote. So I think we need to pay attention at coalition partners because although we're almost 60 million strong, if we band together with other populations, particularly in states where we see larger numbers by forming coalitions, I think we'll have a much greater impact on trying to defeat some of this legislation. Got about 4 minutes left, so maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
Raul Gonzalez, California Teachers Association. I wanted to share more enlightening news. In California, two things. One thing that we're doing is our Secretary of State is actually pushing for automatic registration when you go to the DMV and get your license. So now you're automatically registered versus working from the other angle or the other side. The second thing that we're doing at some of the Democratic parties in the local area, that we're doing high school voter registration rallies. And so as a part of your civics class, as a part of the high school voter registration weeks that happen twice a year, we put all parties out for the students to listen to, and then at the end of this rally, we'll go ahead and register our registered voter high school students. It allows the high school students to register at the age of 17, 17 and a half, and then their registration becomes active when they turn 18. No, I don't know what kind of trend that has, whether that trend has had an impact on your studies. Absolutely. I think I want to definitely celebrate what the great work that folks in this room are already doing in this area. I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's a two-pronged strategy, right? You want to prevent harmful laws from being enacted, but hopefully see more positive laws get changed across the U.S. So I'll add to not only the notion of same-day registration. You're seeing this play out in states like Washington. So we'll be able to analyze what effect does it have specifically on the Latino population. Another one that folks aren't paying close attention to is what about closed primaries? Right, where you have to be a registered D or R to be able to participate in the primary. In many places, the primary is the election, right? That's where all the attention is, that's what really matters. Folks aren't often aware that Latinos, more so than non-Latinos, are moving away from attachment to either Democratic or Republican Party status. So those folks, if they're doing that, particularly young people, at a very alarming rate,
if they're closed out of the electoral process because they can't participate in the primary, think about how difficult it is to tell young people, well, show up to vote at the general, if they feel as though they're being told they can't participate because they're not a registered D or R. So I think you're right. Thinking about those policies, both curbing the ones that we perceive as harmful to our population, but also ensuring that you make the ballot box more accessible for all Americans, Latinos included, I think that's a big part of the overall equation.
Yo soy his maestro historia del mundo. Yo hablo español poquito. I'm from the United Teachers of Dade in Miami. Sometimes I wonder if we should not just campaign against things, but campaign for things. Mm-hmm. And that is, wouldn't it be great if we had more high schools register students, get the voter registration brought to the schools, and at the same time, a lot of students don't have a car, so they never get a driver's license. But many states have state IDs. And if we could bring those, the county officials or whoever does it in each locality to come to high school, colleges, and bring the service of getting that ID to them, that could be a good solution for the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll start with the opening in terms of the value of the Spanish language, right? In terms of mobilization efforts and strategies, we have to keep in mind about half of Latinos in our data, Latino decisions indicate that they prefer to get information about voting, the Affordable Care Act, whatever it is, the issue we're talking about in Spanish. So we have to recognize that you have to be bilingual to reach our population. But I think you're absolutely right. If we learn from the lessons of the past, thinking about the social movement period in the United States from the 1960s and 1970s, young people were at the forefront of that movement. So I think you're exactly right. If you want to galvanize and look at mobilizing more young Latinos, ask young Latinos how they want to be mobilized, right? Those of us that might think we know a lot about this, right? If we're beyond that age group, we have to look to them. They're the experts on galvanizing and mobilizing their own cohorts. So I think you're exactly right. Bring them into the process, not middle of the road, but at the very beginning to get their insights at the forefront of things. Well, that concludes my time with you today. I hope this has set the stage for a wonderful conference. It was an absolute pleasure. You were a great audience. Thank you.
Yes, I'm back. Let's give a special thanks to Dr. Sanchez. The data that he put forth is jarring, it's important, and we should all really take a good look. We can't move our collective destiny forward without having a big picture view of the totality of what we are facing as a community. And the grassroots, the efforts, the state efforts, the local efforts, we focus so much on bringing change in DC, but I think what's happening in Texas, what's happening in California, it's so critical in terms of affecting the day-to-day voter activities and how we empower ourselves as a community and how we move our collective destiny forward. So again, thank you for that great presentation. I hope folks took copious notes. Now I have a real honor of introducing Linda Sanchez, who is, I could read her bio, but I won't because everyone knows who she is, and she is a tireless, energetic, fearless. She's our leader at CHCI, and someone that I'm proud to call a friend and work very closely. We couldn't hope for a better chairwoman, and with that, let me introduce our Madam Chair, Linda Sanchez, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Juan, for that kind introduction. Isn't he a hottie? I think he's fabulous. Ooh, some ladies out there agree with me. Maybe some men, too. Oh, yeah. I hope that you're all highly caffeinated. You guys seem a little subdued this morning, so we're going to try to wake you up. It's going to be a busy week, and it's going to go quickly. So briefly, before we get started, I just want to thank a few people that have done some outstanding work to help support CHCI. Of course, our many sponsors who step up time and time again. CHCI staff and the presenters, and of course all of you for making the pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. To help develop the next generation of Latino leaders. You guys are helping to ensure that that ladder of opportunity exists for those who are coming behind you. So please, a round of applause for all those folks. You know, in discussing political engagement and the changing demographics of our community, I want to expand on something that's personally very important to me, something that I'm really invested in, and that is the role of Latino working families in this country. And it's a cause that's really near and dear to my heart, because as I approach my one-year mark as the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I feel fortunate that I'm able to raise my voice on behalf of those families. And one of the reasons why it's so personal to me is because as a child, this is where it all starts with a story about grapes. As a child, neither I nor my 6 siblings were allowed to eat grapes, even though we loved them. They were one of our favorite snacks. And the reason we were not allowed to eat grapes, as my mother explained it to us, was because of immigrant laborers in the Central Valley of California who were being mistreated, exploited, and barely earning enough to subsist, doing backbreaking work in the fields every day. And over the dinner table, my parents would talk about Cesar Chavez and his efforts to organize farm workers, fighting to ensure fair wages, better health care, and better conditions for every worker. Now, that was something that my parents thought it was important to share with me. And like them, I'm asking all of you to share what is going on in the world with your children, because it's important. Children's ideas are formed when they're very young. So this experience of hearing my parents talk about it and hearing about Cesar Chavez were instrumental in shaping where I ultimately chose my career path in public service. Now, I'm a proud card-carrying member of IBEW Local 441, the electricians local. We got some labor folks in the audience. And I'm the former executive secretary-treasurer of the Orange County Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO, which is the umbrella organization for all of our unions. So I've walked picket lines, I've mobilized workers, I've organized janitors, I've helped employees keep their health care and their pensions, I've helped negotiate labor contracts, and I know firsthand that many workers aren't treated with basic dignity and human respect, especially in the Latino community. Latino workers, and it pains me to say this, we're the lowest paid workers in the country. Women who earn only 78 cents on the dollar for every dollar paid to their white male counterparts have this wage gap that we talk about, right? But for Latinas, for Latina women, the wage gap is even more severe. We're paid about 56 cents for every dollar paid to white, non-Hispanic men. So there's wage gap, and then there's Latino wage gap, which is even bigger. And pay equity has an important impact on the entire family. Think about a single mom trying to support her kids, Latina mother, earning only 56 cents on the dollar for the same work that somebody else is doing. That becomes real. You know, my mom raised 7 kids and then went to night school to get an AA degree and then her BA and her teaching credential. So in her mid-40s, which was not typical at the time, she got a teaching credential and became a teacher. And that salary really impacted our family. By virtue of having a union contract, our family for the first time had health care benefits. Before, my parents used to save for emergencies with cash. We used to pay for our health care in cash. But with the union contract, we had that benefit. In addition, by virtue of the fact that she had a union contract, she made the same wage as all entering teachers, whether they were male or female, white, black, Latino, Asian. That union contract gave her a certain measure of pay equity that doesn't exist outside of the union context. And just like we need equal pay, it goes hand in hand with higher wages, sustainable living wages. Families are having trouble making ends meet, in part because the minimum wage is at its lowest value in 17 years. Republicans in the Congress have refused to raise it since 1997. And you don't have to be a math genius to understand that what you could buy with $1 in 1997 doesn't get you what $1 buys today. You can't hope to buy the same amount of things with that kind of money with inflation. So to me, this issue about basic wage fairness is one of economic morality. If you work full-time in this country, you ought to be able to feed your family and not risk that you're going to spiral downward into poverty. You know what also leads to a bigger paycheck? Raising the overtime salary threshold. Raising the overtime salary threshold is like raising the minimum wage for the Latino community. And like raising the minimum wage, our community would see disproportionately large benefits. Nearly 34% of all salaried Latino workers, that's 2 million total, would directly benefit. This is a crucial step towards increasing economic security. We must ensure that Latino workers are fairly paid for all of the hours that they work. Now, as we continue to push for comprehensive immigration reform, and of course, we suffer from GOP inaction, our undocumented family members remain the most vulnerable group in the entire workforce. Undocumented Latinos are the most likely of any group to suffer wage theft, wage violations, sexual harassment, workplace injuries, and death. Our entire workforce suffers when we allow millions of workers to struggle to support their families without the status to assert their rights. Let me be frank with you. The current outlook for our community is uncertain. And there's a lot of work that we all need to do. Work to do when nearly 1 in 4 Latino families lives below the poverty line, and that's twice the national poverty rate. Work to do when 1/4 of Latinas work in low-wage jobs with no benefits and no protections. Work to do when the Latino unemployment rate is almost at 6.7%, above the national rate of 5.1%. Yet in spite of all those challenges, you cannot overstate our potential for growth. We heard from Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, no relation to me, just moments ago. The Latino population is the fastest growing demographic in the country, currently at more than 55 million. 800,000 Latinos turn 18 every year, and most of them become eligible to register to vote. 26 million Latinos represent about 15% of the workforce, and that number is expected to double by 2050. We wield over $1.5 trillion in purchasing power, and where we spend our money matters. We are poised to become a political and economic powerhouse. Boy, I wish I had $1 for every year I heard about waking the sleeping giant that is the Latino community. We cannot afford to be asleep at the switch any longer. In order to realize our potential, we have to harness our strengths and we have to exert our voices. That's why, to me, a lot of CHCI Conference Week is a call to action, doing something positive to overcome the many challenges that we face. Because today, as our community grows stronger, so do the attacks. From Congress to candidates for the presidency, we hear the hateful rhetoric, the shameful rhetoric. They're using hard-working Latinos as scapegoats for their political agendas. And you know what? They're counting on us to remain silent, to do nothing, to stay home on election day, to not register to vote. And let me tell you, they could not be more mistaken. I am on a personal vendetta to get every Latino that I know that is eligible to vote to register and to participate in the 2016 elections. Because our Latino families are strong. Our community is strong when they put their minds to something. We have strength, we have determination. And we can continue to make this country the envy of the world with our participation. It's immigrants, Latinos, who help build this country up, not tear it down. Honestly, my hope for next year's conference is that we'll be reflecting on the many accomplishments that we've seen in the last year. And I will fight to make that happen. Together, we can make that happen. So, échale ganas, get out there, put your shoulder to that wheel, help push us forward, because we are America, whether people choose to recognize that or not, and the success of this country depends on the success of our community. Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, somebody who is an icon and for me, such a role model, my labor brother, Eliseo Medina. Eliseo was here, yeah, give him a round of applause. Eliseo was here at CHCI last year as the awardee for the 2014 American Dream Medallion of Excellence. He's dedicated his life to fighting for equal rights and economic equality. In 2013, he was a leader of the Fast for Families movement on the National Mall in support of immigration reform. And as the International Secretary-Treasurer of SCIU, Medina led the union's efforts nationwide in protecting our workers. Eliseo's relentless efforts on so many fronts have made an enormous difference in the lives of so many people. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Eliseo Medina, a true leader and champion for working families.
Buenos dias, CHCI. First, let me thank Congresswoman Sanchez for her very kind introduction and for her leadership. Linda is a fearless champion for our community, a fighter for workers and for immigrant rights and for the American dream to be within the reach of everyone. Linda's efforts make America a much better place for all of us, and I want to ask you to join me in thanking Linda for her leadership and her service. I am proud to be here with you this morning to discuss the challenges and opportunities that are facing our community. We are meeting today during a very difficult and trying times, a time in which Latinos are facing unprecedented attacks by politicians who believe that the key to winning elections is to appeal to the worst, not to the best in us. A time in which hateful and divisive rhetoric substitutes for reasoned and principled debate on how to solve the problems of our country. Instead of recognizing our contributions, Mexicans, and by extension all Latinos, are called rapists, murderers, and freeloaders. This language is intended to divide us along racial lines for the sake of a nomination that will be tainted by the stench of racism and intolerance. This kind of speech is not just election year hot air. It can be dangerous because words do not fall in a vacuum. We have already heard reports of attacks on Latinos by people who echo these sentiments. These words and actions demean all of us, and it demeans our democracy, reducing it to a political zero-sum game played for the benefit of some at the expense of our values as a nation of immigrants. This is also a time of rising income inequality. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is under duress. One lay of notice or illness away from economic disaster, and joining the working poor forced to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to survive. Where workers, after a lifetime of work, are worrying whether their promised pensions and Social Security benefits will be there when they need them. A time when young people who manage to attend college graduate with a diploma and a backpack full of student loan debt that can take decades to repay. A time when there is an ongoing attack on unions, on women's rights, and on anyone who is deemed to be different. These are tough times, and for Latinos, they are tougher still. Excuse me. I didn't want to go off to the side, drink it. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we are 16.1% of the workforce, of which 6% is of which 1 in 6 is undocumented. If there was ever a day without Mexicans or Latinos, who would take care of grandma and the kids while parents work? Who will clean our offices? Where would the fruits and vegetables come from? Or who will staff construction or the many industries that rely on us? I'm sure it's certainly not the candidates who would like us to leave the country. Latinos also pay more than our fair share of taxes. In 2013, we paid $193 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. 8% of our income went to taxes compared to 5.1% of the highest 1% of taxpayers in our country. Undocumented workers paid $13 billion in Social Security taxes, from which they will never collect one single penny because of their immigration status. And as consumers, we help support the economy. Our $1.3 trillion in purchasing power buys goods and services, which in turn create more jobs for everyone. Without us, there will be a different and less prosperous America. So what do we get in return for all of these contributions? Well, let me tell you. The median income of Latino households is $17,307 lower than non-Latino whites. 23.5% of Latino households live below the poverty level, compared to 9.6% of white non-Latinos. 28.2% of Latinos were uninsured, compared with 7.2% of non-Latino whites. And because the Affordable Care Act excluded undocumented immigrants, 71% have no coverage. Yeah, times are tough. But in difficult times, there are also opportunities. Because the good news is that the American people know that this is not working, and they're ready for change. We see the signs everywhere. The explosion of support for the Occupy movement and its message of the 99%, and the huge positive response for Pope Francis, who reminded us that, quote, if politics must truly be at the service of the human person, it cannot be a slave to the economy or finance. This great effort is the creation and distribution of wealth as an essential part of its service to the common good. There's also a strong majority and public support for immigration reform. All across the country, states and cities are passing pro-immigrant laws and ordinances, while anti-immigrant initiatives such as Proposition 187, SB 1070, are steadily being relegated to the trash bin of history. There is huge support for the fight for a living wage for the fight for 15 living wage movement. And state after state, $15 per hour is becoming the new standard for worker compensation. But to accomplish the goal will require everyone, employers and workers. In the words, once again, of Pope Francis, I quote, to move forward together as one in a renewed spirit of fraternity and solidarity, cooperating generously for the common good, end of quote. We hope that major employers in this country who rely on Latinos as employees and as consumers, whether they be McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart, or Apple, will heed the Pope's message and work to make the economy more equal and just. If they do, it could be a game changer for this country. But let me tell you, there is something happening in this country. Change is coming. I can feel it. And it's coming from the ground up. Immigrants and Latinos continue working to build on the moment, which they help to create with their feet, with their voices, their votes, their prayers, and their hope. They fight because they know what is at stake: justice for our undocumented brothers and sisters, and a better future for all of us. A future where workers will earn a fair day pay for a fair day's work, where they won't have to choose between paying rent or medical care, where their children will have the opportunity to pursue their dreams, and where they will be welcome as full-fledged members of this society with the same rights and privileges as everybody else. And in they fight, they have the full support of the American labor movement, because we understand we cannot build a better future as long as 11 million workers are forced to live in the shadows of our society, and that for American workers to succeed, we all have to succeed. Brothers and sisters, I also believe this is a fight that belongs to all of us, not just to immigrants and union members. We all want and deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. We all want and deserve to be able to provide a decent life and better opportunities for our children. And we all want to build and live in the America of our dreams. I am convinced this and more we can accomplish with our common vision, our purpose, and our action. Thank you very much. Sí se puede. So now I would like to invite Representative Sanchez to join me again. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. So I think there's people out here with microphones. So if you have any questions, put your hand up. Yes.
Being from Kansas, such a red state, often I've been asked by many of my friends, does my vote really count? What could I say to them to encourage them to vote?
I would just say your vote always counts. It always counts. And the minute that you believe it doesn't, the other side has won. So exercise your right to vote. It's the most powerful way that you have of raising your voice. And even if you think it doesn't make a difference, it does.
You know, politics are going to go on. Elections will go on with or without us. If we don't vote, our voice will never be heard. And if we get discriminated, if we don't get paid right, and we don't do anything, whose fault is it? Theirs or ours? So I think we have to understand we're the architects of our own destiny, and in order for us to fulfill that destiny, we have to participate. It's our right and our duty to make sure that we vote, to make sure our children have a better future than the one we had. So, a votar todos. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, my name is Ron Malone, United Teachers of Dade. The question is to Congresswoman Sanchez. Congresswoman Sanchez, I know you guys are in session right now, wrapping up the EC reauthorization for education. My question to you is, what do you see that are the impacts of the new education policy with respect to minorities, particularly African Americans, Latinos, and so forth? How is this bill going to be different with respect to Nickleby?
We're very concerned because, as I'm sure you can appreciate, the legislation that is coming out of the House side is not exactly progressive legislation, and it often hurts the most vulnerable in our society, and that includes minority populations. So we are, struggling to try to work with the Senate bill to make sure that we can come up with something that's at least not destructive and tearing at the very fiber of our educational system. So, it's as my father would say, it's a tough road to hoe to find, find something that is acceptable, but, we keep pushing and we can't give up that fight.
Any other questions? Yes.
Menyo with the Center for Responsible Lending. This question is for the Congresswoman. First of all, thank you, Congresswoman, for the piece that you published today in the American Banker regarding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You spoke about the economic conditions that our community face, and so therefore, I think that it's very important that we continue to protect consumers against predatory practices. There are a number of bills right now in Congress, including H.R. 1737 on predatory practices in auto lending. There are various other bills and attempts to undermine the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What do you recommend for us to do to support the agency that has done so much to help consumers at this point?
Yeah, that's an issue that the CHCI has recently become very interested in participating in. And I just have to say, we're not a monolithic community. There are a lot of different views with respect to payday lenders and title loan lenders. I met with a group of constituents recently from my area who had horror stories to talk about the downward debt spiral that occurs with many of these payday lenders. And there aren't a lot of protections for, again, some of the most vulnerable who look at, having to go to payday lenders as a way to try to make ends meet, just to meet basic necessities. And the argument is always, well, nobody forces them to take out a loan, but many of their practices ensure that they remain in this debt cycle and that they pay more in fees and interest than the cost of the loan with interest alone. So I intend to be a little more active and vocal on that, and to try to urge the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who has a vested interest in this discussion, to try to ensure that there are more protections and that the CFPB takes that into account when they issue new guidelines for lending.
So thank you very much, and have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Yes, I'm back again. And that was a great presentation. I don't think I've ever been referred to as a CHCI hottie, but I'll take it. Thank you, Congresswoman. And before I introduce next, I want to recognize Congressman Serrano. I'm not sure if he's in the audience. I was understanding the Dean of the Hispanic Caucus is here, or he was. I wanted to make sure we give a round of applause for him. Someone saw him earlier. So I don't know, he may have departed, but I wanted to make sure we give our warmest regards. So next up, I want to introduce Congressman Castro. He is, yeah, that's right, give it up for him. He is, I could read the bio, but I think everybody knows who Congressman Castro is. He is one of the emerging leaders, if not a leader in Congress in Texas. He is, in many ways, just embodies the best and the brightest. When we think about some of the perils that we heard in the last presentation, we have folks like Joaquin fighting every day, whether it's back at home, bringing those values of San Antonio here to from Texas to Congress, trying to change that state, defend our civil liberties, doing the right thing. I'm proud to call him my friend. Let me introduce Joaquin Castro.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Well, it's wonderful to be here with so many active Latinos in Washington, D.C., and wonderful to be part of CHCI, an organization that over the years has brought thousands of young Latinos to the heart of democracy here in our nation's capital. I, of course, am Joaquin Castro, and those of you that are from Texas, any Texans in here? All right. Those of you from Texas know that I represent San Antonio, and I have a twin brother, Julian, who was the mayor of San Antonio. My brother is now the HUD secretary, and so I'm not the former mayor of San Antonio. I didn't give that great speech at the DNC a few years ago. I try to take credit, but I can't. And I tell people the way that you tell us apart is that I'm a lot better looking than Julian is. He says that since we're both in Washington now, he's the one with the real job. You know, as we think about the Latino community today, the Latino community is larger in this country than it's ever been. It's more diverse than it's ever been. Not only do you have in places like San Antonio and Los Angeles a strong Mexican-American community, you also have a strong Cubano community in Florida and New York and New Jersey and other states. Also many who are from Central America. You have Colombianos, you have folks from Venezuela. You have such an incredible array of wonderful Latino communities across this country. We used to think of Latinos as being in the big states. Texas, where I come from, New York, California, Illinois, Florida. But more and more, the Latino community is growing very quickly in places that we never thought of having Latino communities. Places like Georgia, North and South Carolina, Nebraska and Minnesota. And as our community has become more diverse and larger, the importance of participating in American democracy has only grown more urgent. And I come here today with one simple request of you who are here in Washington because you care, because you understand the stakes of voting and democracy. My request is to do every single thing that you can to get the people in your lives who are not voting to go vote. There's a reason that I say that. In 2014, Latinos of the major ethnic groups had the lowest voter participation rate of any, at 27%. 27%. That's on top of the fact that there are now 8.8 million permanent residents in the United States, millions of those Latinos, who choose, for whatever reasons, some of them economic, some of them personal, not to become citizens. I believe that to change the course of politics in this country, we need to change both of those things. And I know that all of you here in this room have the power to change that. And the reason I know that is because all of us have friends and cousins and relatives who, you ask them if they're going to vote and they say, oh, for what? Or what does it matter? Or I don't know who to vote for. So it's incumbent upon all of us to reach out to those folks in our lives and ask them to actually go out and vote. And the way that you do that is to let them know how important it is to you. And I want to give you a quick example of what I mean, right? Has anybody ever, I'm sure everybody has, have you ever moved out of a house or an apartment, right? And you got to move out in the next 3 days, and so you call a friend and you say, hey, I got to move out on a Friday or a Saturday night. Can you help me move, right? And then you hear a sigh or a groan on the other side of the phone. But they say yes. Why do they say yes? Is it because they love moving stuff on Saturday night? Of course not. It's because you asked them to. Because it's important to you and they care about you and you ask them to. It's the same principle with voting. Each of us in our lives has the ability to get somebody active and get somebody involved. And the stakes are so incredibly high. 50 years ago, around 1965, there were about 12 million Latinos in this country. Today, there are 55 million. In 50 years, that number will double. But our voting strength and our impact in this country has been diluted by the fact that too many of us have stayed on the sidelines for too long. And what happens when you stay on the sidelines? Other people dominate the field. Many people dominate the field who have strong opinions about the Latino community. It's been mentioned in the media and even today several times that the leading frontrunner for the Republican Party, we all know this story, the leading frontrunner for the Republican Party called Mexican immigrants rapists and murderers and said, well, by the way, I assume some of them are good people. Some of them are good people? If you're like me, when you heard him say that, you might have wondered, wait a minute, where does my grandmother fit into that? Where does my dad or my mom fit into that? Were they some of the good people he's talking about? My own grandmother came here in 1922 as a 6-year-old orphan from Mexico. She came with her younger sister, Trinidad. They came here because both their parents had died around the time of the Mexican Revolution. And the closest relatives that could take them in were not in Mexico, in Coahuila, but were in San Antonio, Texas. And that's how my family ended up in San Antonio. My grandmother never made it through elementary school. She taught herself how to read and write in Spanish and English. My grandmother worked her whole life as a maid, a babysitter, and a cook to do everything that she could to give her only child, my mom Rosie, a better chance in life than she had. And I bet if we went around this room, many of you would have similar stories in your own families. That story is not unique to me. It's not even unique to Mexican Americans. That is a story of the Irish and the other Europeans who came here years ago. It's a story of Asian Americans who settled in places like Los Angeles and Houston and San Francisco and many other cities. It's the story of African Americans who, after they prevailed over slavery and Jim Crow, did every single thing that they could to give their kids a better chance in life. That's an American story. That is our story. But the rhetoric that we've heard lately coming from many presidential candidates and others is damaging not only to immigrants. You know, it's fascinating. After Donald Trump made his remarks, most people were outraged, Latino and non-Latino. Most people said he went too far. But there were some who said quietly, I'm not an immigrant. I don't care. He wasn't talking about me. Even within the Latino community. Those of you in Texas, even in Texas. Well, a few days after Trump said what he did, in Boston there was a homeless man, a Hispanic man, who was lying on the street, not bothering anybody, and a few guys beat him up. They beat him up. And when the police asked him why they did it, they said, because Trump is right. We should kick all these people out of here. A few days after Trump said what he said, there was a man in San Diego, California, who had taken his child to the park. And when they were leaving the park, in the parking lot, two men pulled up in a truck, a car, and they told this man, they said, take your anchor baby and go back to Mexico. So for those who think that these words only affect immigrants, I would submit to you that they create a culture of fear and resentment and anger that is dangerous to all Americans and especially to Latinos. You see, they didn't ask that homeless man if he was a legal immigrant or a citizen or undocumented immigrant before they beat him up. They didn't ask the guy in the parking lot whether he was actually from Mexico and here undocumented. They saw the color of his skin and they beat that man up in Boston. And those guys in the parking lot in San Diego, they saw the color of his skin and they made an ugly remark. What I'm saying to you is that we have the power to change that by doing something that is fundamentally American. by going out to vote. The stakes are so incredibly high. 50 years ago, if you had asked somebody who was living in Europe or Latin America or Asia where on earth they would want to go if they were going to leave their home country, the answer was very clearly the United States of America. As the Latino community grows, we're 17% now. 50 years will be much higher than that. 50 years from now, the question for all of us here is when you ask somebody in 2065 where they would want to go if they were going to leave their home country, the answer is still the United States of America. God bless you all and very best of luck on everything that you're doing. All right, well now I'd like to introduce you guys to somebody who really is a legend and an institution in Washington, D.C. He is, I think, the leading prognosticator of elections in the United States. His name is Charlie Cook, and for those of you in Washington, you know that he puts out something called the Cook Political Report. He's with the National Journal, and this guy over the years has spread so much wisdom about elections, about politics, and we're very honored to have him. Charlie Cook, please join me. Please. Oh,
here on the scale here. Thank you very much, Congressman Castro. You know, when you're thinking about who are the rising leaders and our political leaders in our country for the next few decades, Congressman Castro and his brother are absolutely at the very, very forefront, and I think we should expect to hear a whole lot from these guys in the future. It's a real honor to be asked to speak with you today for the CHCI. It's you know, I was listening to Congresswoman Sanchez, who also does a great job in the House, to talking about the rise of the Hispanic vote or the Latino vote, and it hit me that, you know, this really is, or I've long thought that Latinos represent sort of they did represent sort of the sleeping giant of American politics, and then they woke up in 2008, and boy, they were heard. And then and again in 2012, boy, they were heard. Now, Congresswoman Sanchez said something about you can't be asleep at the switch. Well, okay, I'll say you can't take naps at midterm elections, you know. You really have to turn out for those. But it really, really, really is hugely important. I mean, that when you have an election, when you have, you know, let me just put it this way. If any election where anyone thinks that Donald Trump and Ben Carson are the answer, I would just ask, what the hell was the question? And that, but the question is, how do you as a community react? And my job, I'm an independent and middle-of-the-road guy, and my job is just sort of be like an umpire and stand behind the plate and call balls and strikes and not be a cheerleader. But I think it really is going to be a test of the character of the Latino community in terms of how do you react. And when someone engages in demagoguery at your expense, do you pull back and sulk, or do you redouble your efforts? And I think that will be a real test. And it's a test in presidential years, and boy, it's a really test in midterm years. This is just really important. You know, my job is to watch politics, watch elections, and every election is unique. The elections are like fingerprints. Everyone's a little different. Some are more different than others, and obviously this one is really different. But I think if you try to think, why are so many voters behaving so weirdly this year? And that's clearly the case. And I would argue that it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of one is the two parties are becoming more and more ideological, where the Republican Party is just a heck of a lot more conservative than it was even when George W. left office back in 2008. And certainly the Democratic Party has moved over to the left much farther than it was, say, when Bill Clinton left office. And so a lot of it is the two parties are becoming more intense, and you see fewer conservative moderate Democrats, you see fewer liberal moderate Republicans. So the parties are sort of moving over. And what that means in, for example, one case is you have candidates, I'm 61, who are my age or a little bit older, who are sort of caught in time warps. I mean, if you think about it, Jeb Bush was one of the most conservative governors in America when he was governor of Florida from 1998 to 2006. He hasn't moved at all, but his party has moved much further over to the right. So someone who was one of the most conservative governors in the country is now somewhat on the left of his own party. Or Hillary Clinton, who was one of the most liberal members of the Clinton administration, and now she's sort of scrambling to reestablish her liberal credentials, and she hasn't moved, it's just the party moves. So ideology is a piece of it. A second piece of it is economic anxiety, is that Americans, and not just Latinos, but but so many Americans feel really, really, really worried about the economy. Sure, we came out of the recession, technically speaking, in 2009, but while the economy came out of a recession, for most Americans, their economy hasn't come out of a recession. And the fact is that, you know, the real median household income hasn't moved up since 1999. It's true with Latinos, it's true with most other folks. And the thing is that people feel like they're working harder and harder, they're playing by the rules, and but they can't get ahead. And that's creating a lot of angst out there. And it does go to, and something that Congressman Castro touched on, is that throughout American history, one of the hallmarks is Americans have always thought that their kids and their grandkids would have more opportunities, greater opportunities than they had. And for the first time in American history, that's not so much true anymore. A majority do not think that. So that's creating problems. We're seeing a rise of populism on the far right with the Tea Party movement and Trump and Carson. And on the far left, we're seeing it with Occupy Wall Street, and Elizabeth Warren is one of the most popular people in the Democratic Party. Look how well Bernie Sanders is doing. So this populism is sort of adding to the combustibility of American politics. And then we're just seeing a fear that a lot of Americans have, and I would say this is not much in the Latino community, but a lot of people, and particularly sort of older whites and older white guys, that fear of the future. I mean, that the country is changing, society is changing so rapidly, and some people just don't deal with change very well, and they feel threatened, and they're lashing out. And I think that's a lot of what the Trump stuff is all about, is people that are just suddenly, their world is changing so much, and they're lashing out as a result of it. And it doesn't make it good, it doesn't make it right, it doesn't justify it in any way, but that they just simply can't tolerate diversity. And now the good news is there aren't a lot of people getting born that way anymore. And there aren't a lot of people turning 18 or 21 anymore like that. And the number of people that are like that will be fewer when you leave this building than there were when when you came in, because a lot of them are sort of dying off. But not fast enough maybe, but hey, but the thing is, all these are just creating a lot of challenges. Now on the Democratic side, we don't know the presidential race. Lord knows what's going to happen. My hunch is that, Hillary Clinton is going through a really, really tough patch with this whole email thing. She made a lousy decision, and she's suffering the consequences of it. As long as this stays in the political domain and doesn't sort of get over in the legal side, It's going to cost her a lot politically. It's going to make things harder, but it'll probably peter out after the first of the year. Now, if this thing starts to slop over in the legal side, then that's a different story, but I don't think it will. I don't think that to me, the Bernie Sanders thing, there's a long history of people of a quarter to a third of the Democratic Party really into sort of outside the box, outsider candidacies, and whether it was Jerry Brown back in '76 or Gary Hart or Bill Bradley or Howard Dean, that sort of thing. I think you're going to see her plow through. I don't think you're going to see Vice President Biden getting in. I think he's a really good man, but I think this morning is not going to end anytime soon. Over on the Republican side, real quickly, and boy, I'm just racing through this. I think you have to separate what's going on in the Republican Party between on the conventional Republican side on one side and then what's happening what I call the exotic side of the Republican Party, which is the Tea Party people and the evangelicals and the libertarians and then just the people that are way out in right field. I think what's happened on the conventional side is a couple of candidates that were expected to do really well have just underperformed and left a vacuum. Jeb Bush was supposed to do really well. He's underperformed so far. Scott Walker was supposed to do really well. He flamed out. Marco Rubio got off to had a great announcement speech, then kind of disappeared for a while, just had a great debate. He seems to have some momentum, and John Kasich is just getting started. But nobody's filled that vacuum, but there will be a conventional Republican emerge and go into the finals. Think of NCAA basketball brackets. On the more exotic side, I think we're already starting to see Trump starting to kind of hook down. I think you'll see Carson rise up and be #1 for a while over on that side. But my hunch is you're going to, and Carly Fiorina's having a kind of a good patch, but right now, but I think you're going to see Ted Cruz emerge as the guy on the more exotic side, so that you're going to see a Rubio or a Bush most likely, versus a Ted Cruz, and we'll see what Republicans do. Ultimately, though, and this is where you come in big time, is what's the 2016 election going to be about? Is it going to be about time for a change? Because normally after 8 years of any one party in power, Americans vote for change. They usually switch parties. Is it going to be about time for change, which Republicans obviously want? Or is it going to be about changing American demographics? And the fact is, a Republican cannot lose the African American vote by an 87-point margin, the Latino vote by a 44-point margin, the Asian American vote by a 47-point margin. You can't do that and have a realistic expectation of winning anymore. The country's changed. Mitt Romney got 59% of the white vote in the last election. Nobody's ever gotten 59% of the white vote and lost an election before, and yet he lost by almost 4 points. There are just simply not enough voters like that, and that's what Republicans are doing. And so it's both demographics and both in terms of ethnicity, but also generational. I mean, Republicans are just running up the score, or they've won by running up the score with the greatest generation, and then the generation right behind that, the silent generation, and then just been getting devastated with all the younger generations. They're sort of clinging on to these older voters, and the world's changing. And so what's this election going to be about? But I think that's where the character of the Latino community comes in. You know, if you guys just redouble your efforts, if you turn out anywhere near you did in 8 and 12, and if you start coming out in midterm elections, when people attack you, you know, what do? You know, do you go sulk, or do you stand up and fight and stand up for yourself? And that's ultimately the biggest question that's out there. But it's an honor to be here with you. And I think Congressman Castro and I are going to do questions for a couple of minutes. But anyway, Congressman Castro, come on out. He may be the more handsome of the Castro brothers, but I'm the more handsome of the two of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
I don't want him to give me a negative rating on my next race, so you're absolutely right.
This guy couldn't lose re-election on a bet. I mean, no, you're about future. You're not about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, we'd love to take them. I think we have time for a few. Only easy ones, please. But.
And raise your hand in a non-threatening way.
Yeah.
Raul Gonzalez, California Teachers Association. You know, we just had a real tumultuous endorsement of Hillary Clinton, and on the other side was Bernie Sanders. What's different about Hillary versus 2008? And the same scenario, we have a candidate surging, and what tells us that she's not going to peter out?
Thanks.
He's a prognosticator, so.
I think that there's just sort of a world of difference between Bernie Sanders circa 2015-16 and Barack Obama 2008. That, first of all, one represented youth and excitement in the future, and the other guy, well, put it this way. Ronald Reagan was 69 years old when he was first elected, and people wondered whether that was too old. Hillary Clinton, now I'm not saying 69 is too old, actually that's the same age that Hillary Clinton will be next year, but that's sort of at the kind of upper reaches. Bernie just turned 74. He's going to be 75. What? A 75-year-old coming into the I mean, this isn't serious. And second, I mean, this just, you know, you can't, the actuarial tables are not favorable for something like that. It's just flat not, whether you like it or not. And secondly, is that, tell you what, while you're in town, if you meet with members of Congress, meet with Democratic members of Congress, meet with pretty liberal Democratic members of Congress, and ask them how important a role, how effective has Bernie Sanders been in the U.S. Congress for the last 23 years? Nada, zero, no impact whatsoever. And that's, I mean, so it's like, get real. I mean, this is not, I mean, I think he is a vehicle for people that don't like the establishment, that are further over to the left, but let's face it, this guy couldn't win a general election on a bet. And you know, I think it's just a good way for people that want to torture Hillary Clinton to do it. And that's what it is, more or less. I mean, these are obviously not the views of the CHCI, but, you know, I tell you what, if Hillary Clinton is not the Democratic nominee, you know, it'll either be Joe Biden or it's going to be somebody else that's running, maybe an O'Malley or someone like that. But frankly, it's not, you know, I'd bet my house that the Democratic nominee is not going to be Bernie Sanders.
I'll just add.
And it's paid for.
You know, of course, I'm supporting Hillary Clinton. I supported Hillary Clinton in 2008, and you're right. I mean, ultimately, that ended up being a losing campaign. But the reason I'm supporting her, a big part of the reason, is because she does have a long history within the Latino community. You know, if you listen to her speak, she tells a story of volunteering, I think through her church, to take care of the kids of migrant children, migrant workers who were working the fields. And, you know, as a young girl, she would go help babysit. But even as an adult in the 1970s, she went down to Texas, both her and Bill Clinton, and went, in her first real political experience, went and registered in the barrios of San Antonio and the Rio Grande Valley, registered people to vote, many of those folks Latinos. And so, you know, that's kind of you know, anecdotal in addition to the substantive policy positions, but I'm supporting her this year. One more question, because we only have 30-something seconds. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, to you, Charlie, and Joaquin, I wish you the very best. My name is Bob Garcia, one of the original members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus way back when.
All right.
Joaquin, first of all, you made me feel very old when you talked about 50 years ago. That's when I was elected under the Voting Rights Act. And so you made me feel like an old man.
I'm sorry.
But to both of you, excuse, but to both of you, I think, Joaquin, you touched on it. There is just nothing more important than every Hispanic in the United States who is eligible to vote, be registered to vote, and get out to vote. And if you emphasize that, I have been an observer, Joaquin, in elections all over Latin America. In some countries, if you don't vote, they fine you $100. Everybody has to vote, whether you're illiterate or you're the most sophisticated professor. So the emphasis always has to be on voting. And so I thank you for that. And Charlie, I thank you for your many, many years of service to those of us who really didn't understand the process here in Washington.
Well, just to echo that, I think it's a matter of self-respect. If someone doesn't believe that you are a legitimate American, then I don't know about it pissed me off. And why it wouldn't tick off every Latino citizen, every Latino resident to want to become a citizen. Why, you know, if it doesn't do that, I just say, well, shoot, you know, you get whatever. I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but that's how you ought to do. That's how you ought to be, is basically say, we're going to fight and we're going to do everything in our power to gain and to deserve the respect of all the other citizens who are no more legitimate than you are. And it's just simple as that. And I'm not being political. I'm just saying, you know, I don't understand any other reaction other than that. And so it's going to be a real test of whether, you know, you're going to fight up to and above your weight class in 2016, and after that in 2018 and 2020, and on like that, because I mean, this stuff really matters. It really does. You have people like Congressman Garcia, Congressman Castro, who have devoted their lives to this, and you know, you need to have their backs.
No, and thank you, Charlie, for saying that. And he's absolutely right. And Congressman Garcia, from somebody who's 41 years old, I consider myself of a grateful generation for everything that you all did in blazing trails for us. I want to say thank you for your service and the service so many over the years. I believe that 2016 is the nation's Pete Wilson moment. Those of you who were familiar or lived in California in the 1990s remember in 1994 when Pete Wilson ran for re-election, the commercials they put on the air with the footage of people running across the border, they keep coming. And the ugliness in California politics at that time. Surprisingly, Donald Trump and others have been able to surpass that ugliness in national politics this year. But you look at what happened in California after that moment, the politics of the state are completely different than they were in 1994.
That's absolutely true.
And hopefully the politics of the country will be different after 2016. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you. And folks, we are out of time. It was such an engaging conversation that we have moved a little past the schedule, so we're going to try and make that up. We're going to encourage folks to go as quickly as possible to the next plenary session. Thank you to all of our guests. But before everyone leaves, a big shout out to T-Mobile for the CHCI app. I hope everybody has downloaded that. It's very cool. And we want to make sure, we would be remiss if we did not say a special thanks to them for funding that very important tool. So thank you, go forth, enjoy, and have a great conference. Thank you.